In this session, we're going to be looking at everyone's favourite question on the paper one, and that's question 3, the structure question. And you'll notice as well that it's exactly the same assessment objective as question 2, but it's looking at something at the other end of the objective. So if you look at the actual objective here, you can see it's exactly the same as the one for language, but what we're doing is we're focusing on a completely different part of it. We're looking here for how writers use structure to achieve effects and influence the readers, using relevant subject terminology to support their views. So in that way, it's actually really similar to what we did with the language one. You've just got to take out all the language subject terminology and replace it with the structural subject terminology. And the way you answer the question is very much the same, in the sense that you write the technique, the quotation, and then you have the analysis. So this is what a question 3 will look like. Now the thing about question 3 is that it will never change, unlike question 2 or question 4. They'll always change depending on the passage that you've been given in the exam, but question 3 won't change. It will always read in this way. You need to think about the whole of the source. So in this instance, you get to actually use everything in the whole source as opposed to just these little bits. The text is from the opening of a novel. How has the writer structured the text to interest you as a reader? And that's a bit that's really important. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to find structural features that you think the writer has used to keep us interested as a reader. It's no good saying things like, oh, it makes us want to read on, without actually understanding, well, why does it want to make us read on? And that's the thing that we're going to have a look at in this PowerPoint. It does always tell you as well, these 3 bullet points at the bottom, these are the things that they actually want you to write about. And the students that don't write about them are the ones that never end up getting very good marks for this. So you're told for the first one what the writer focuses your attention on at the beginning, and that's really important. How and why the writer changes his focus as the extract develops, and any other structural features that interest you. So those first 2 bullet points are actually telling you this is what we want you to focus on. Where are we looking in that first paragraph or that first couple of paragraphs? Where does it change halfway through? What happens at the end? Do we return to the same focus? So there's a lot of things that we need to think about there. And as you can see, finally, it is worth 8 marks as well. And what's also important here with the 8 marks is that we've got a lot of students that get really worried about and really nervous about this question. But it is only an 8-mark question. You've got a 20-mark question coming up straight after this that you're going to want to spend a lot more time on, and many of our students find it much easier. So don't fret too much about this 8-mark question. Do what you can and move on. So if we have a quick look here, this is the mark scheme that we've got, and as you can see there, to get a level 3 in the mark scheme, that's between 5 and 6 marks, you can see here that the word that's highlighted is clear understanding. It clearly explains the effects of the writer's choice of structural features. And that's basically really going along the lines of that, can you pick out a subject terminology or something to do with structure? Can you explain why you think the writer has used it? As long as it's clear, as long as I can understand it, I can give you the marks for it. When you look at the 4th bullet point, relevant examples, and then the last one is subject terminology accurately. So you're going to have to use that subject terminology if you want to get between 5 and 6 marks. When you look at level 4, to get to 7 and 8 marks, it's slightly different. You need to use detailed and have a detailed and perceptive understanding of structural features. And that's when it gets much harder. That's having an intimate knowledge of structure, so knowing exactly why the writer has done these certain aspects in their writing. Why have they picked perhaps this bit of dialogue? Why have they put it there? Why is the focus change in the 3rd paragraph? So we need to be thinking about that all the time, in terms of how we get it to be detailed and perceptive. You can see there that the analyzes the effects of the writer's choice of structural features, doesn't really change. But then you have these judicious examples, and essentially what that means is that the best example out of the whole passage to explain what you're trying to say? Because a lot of the time there'll be maybe 3 or 4 good examples, but there'll be one perfect one. And what the examiner is looking for is it that perfect example to explain what you're trying to analyse? And again, sophisticated subject terminology. So we'll go on in the next slide to have a look at some of the sophisticated subject terminology that we're going to want you to use. So some key terms that we'd like you to use in your answer. So as you're going along with this, you can write down some of the key terms as a good way of revising them. What I've asked my class to do, and it seems quite helpful, is to use flashcards. Write the technique on the front and on the back. Just write down either a definition or a couple of examples. Really quick, easy way to revise and remember them, because the thing about this question is if you can remember these structural features, you'll never have a problem with this part of the exam. If you don't remember the structural features, you're going to struggle. Right. So the first thing, AQA have told us that they want students to use these words in the answer. So what they want students to do across the country is to use the words beginning, middle and end. Well, that actually links up, if you think about it, to the very first bullet point. Where's the focus in the beginning of this extract? So if you're using those words, you're showing the examiner you're thinking about the extract as a whole and how it moves from point A to point B to point C. And that's going to be really important. And they're easy words to use. Lots of students should be able to use them and be able to get the marks because of it. They also want you to use the word shift, i.e. where does the focus shift? So where are we looking at first? Where does it move in the next paragraph or the third paragraph? And so where are we shifting? And again, it's the idea that students understand that a piece of writing isn't static. It's constantly moving. We are with the people in the story. We're moving along with them. We have the word movement, of course, because as I said, it's not static. We are moving all the time. And progression. So how does the story progress from start to finish? And these are the words that AQA have been going around to different schools and saying, get these words into your answer. And if you get those words into your answer, then you are going to be talking about structure. So, other structural devices that we're going to want you to write about. Change of mood and tone. Now, change of mood and tone is really important, particularly when you're looking at tone. When you're reading a passage or writing, sometimes you can start with a really happy tone and it sets up a really calm atmosphere, and then suddenly, all of a sudden, it completely changes and we've got this very frightening tone perhaps coming on, or very upsetting. Well, that rapid change of tone is actually called a volta. V-O-L-T-A, and we see that a lot in poetry actually, but it's a structural technique that writers use all the time, particularly when they're perhaps trying to surprise or shock the reader, and that's where we have change of mood or tone. And actually some of the passages that you've been studying, you've probably noticed that sudden change of tone happening in your writing. Well, that's something you can write about. Paragraph lengths. It's very difficult, I would say, for any student to write about a paragraph that's very long. What we can write about, though, is if paragraphs are getting short. And what I found in one of the passages that I thought was really interesting is the paragraph lengths get shorter and shorter and shorter, almost reflecting the narrator's state of mind as they become more panicked. So I don't think it's about length in terms of long paragraphs, but short paragraphs, particularly if there's a group of them, I think definitely have an impact on the structure of a piece of writing. Obviously we have openings and endings. Now when we talk about openings or endings, in particular, are we left with any cliffhangers? So are we left on the edge of our seat because we are desperate to find out what happens to that character, or we need to know what's happened within that setting? And that's something that we need to say and we need to write down. We also have something called an anticlimax or a climax. Are we led to believe that it's going to be a really exciting ending, only actually to be let down in the sense that, well, you're going to have to keep reading if you want to get to the best bit? Or are we given a real climax? We really are building up and the tension is ramped up and we're getting quite excited. And there's the three words you want to be able to use: cliffhangers, anticlimax and climax. There we have that change of perspective. And change of perspective is important because it's essentially, well, where are we looking? And I talk to my group about, think about it as a movie camera. So when we're reading a passage of writing, imagine you're behind the camera. Where's the camera pointed in the first scene? Where's it moved to the second scene? And along with that, we have shift of place. And again, it's the same idea with the movie camera. Okay, so where's the camera sweeping along to? Are we inside to start with and then we zoom outside, or are we outside and zoom inside? Or do we go from big to small? A good example of that would be any of the kind of David Attenborough Earth series, when we always start looking far away from some beautiful vista of the jungle or of the Antarctic, and then we zoom in very, very slowly and we get closer and closer and closer. And that's exactly what we mean by shift of place. And every piece of work that we've had in every exam, there's been some kind of movement, some kind of change of focus, and you've just got to be able to identify it and then explain, well, why. And for most reasons it's because we're trying to get a better picture of where we are, why are we here, what's going on, what's the background, because without that, as a reader, we're always left confused. So the next one that's important is the movement of time. Now this can be very simple. For example, in the Brighton Rock paper, we're actually given his itinerary of time: 11 o'clock to 12 o'clock here, 12 o'clock to 1 o'clock there. So that's quite straightforward. But on some papers, particularly the Lamppost Man paper with the short story, we get the sense that it's getting darker and darker and darker. So we even hear the chimes of the clock up in the early part, but it starts to get very dark, and then by the end we're in complete darkness with the lampposts all switched on. So we get a sense that time is moving on, and it's an easy one to pick out, but it won't be, of course, in every passage. We also have narrative perspective. Now we have first person and third person. Obviously these are really important because if you're writing in first person, it's a really great way of building up a lot of tension, and you can get into someone's head, so you can really get into what their thoughts and feelings are. The disadvantage of first person is that you can't see round the corner because you're stuck behind those person's eyes. So that's why it's good if you're writing a scary story, because you're building up that kind of fear, so you only understand things when the narrator understands them. Whereas third person is a really good technique when you're trying to establish, well, what's going on everywhere. And so we can hover almost like a camera above the protagonist. We can follow them around, but if the narrator wants to, he can perhaps zoom away and look at something else instead. We have something called an omnipotent narrator, where essentially we can basically go absolutely everywhere. So we could be in England, for example, and then in the next paragraph or the next chapter we could be in Africa, for example. Now you're unlikely to get a passage like that. So what you've got actually there would be more of a restrictive third person, in the sense that we're hovering above one or two main characters, but we can't really move too far out of the room. And again, it's all about building up tension in that sense, because if we could go absolutely everywhere, it might ruin some of the excitement of the story. And of course, one of the most obvious ones, we are always going to be introduced to either a description of either a setting or a character. That's guaranteed. You can't have any piece of writing without one of them happening. We're going to meet a character, or we're going to meet a new setting, or we're going to have both, in more than likely. If you think about the Jamaica Inn paper, we meet, not only do we meet three characters at the end of that extract, we also are introduced to this really kind of dark, depressing setting of all the land around it towards kind of Devon and Cornwall. We have direct speech, and again, the writer has chosen to put in direct speech at this point in the story. Well, why? What's the direct speech saying? What's it telling us? Again, if most writers use speech sparingly, because if you have a whole piece of writing that's just speech, well, then it's a play. So what's the speech there for? It's doing a job. Sometimes it's very simple, it's just giving us more of the plot, finding out what's happening. But other times it's perhaps building excitement, building tension, making us try to feel scared or worried or panicked. Then we have repetition and circularity. Now I know repetition comes up in language, but it's more about repetition of ideas. So for example, the repetition of darkness. Do we see lots of darkness coming through? And it might not be the word darkness, it could be darkness or evening or dusk. We get that sense of it being repeated. And circularity, and what I mean by circularity is, if you think about Of Mice and Men, the story begins in the clearing and then ends in the clearing, so it kind of goes full circle. And some of the passages that we've seen, for example the Brighton Rock, almost have that sense of circularity. We begin with Hale, we end with Hale, particularly looking at his fingers. So that's something that comes across there. And finally, use of contrast in situations, settings, character or themes. So what I mean by that is essentially, are we ever given any contrasts, like light or day, good and evil, inside and outside, dry and wet? And if we see a contrast, then clearly it's been put there on purpose by the writer to get us to understand just how either miserable or great something is. And finally, anticlimax and climax that we've got at the bottom there. Again, it links to openings and endings, but it's the same idea. Climaxes are pretty easy to talk about because we're building up that sense of excitement. Anticlimaxes are harder, but we do see more of them, particularly because if it's only an extract of writing, although the writer didn't intend that extract to be particularly exciting at the end. So there might be, for example, in the Brighton Rock, we might have been expecting something really exciting happen at the end of that passage. For example, Hale was going to be murdered, but he isn't. He just looks at his fingers and he looks at his bitter nails, and then that's the end of the passage. So there's a bit of an anticlimax there, but we know the murder is going to come. We're told that at the beginning, so we want to read on to see how it happens, why it happens, who's involved. So what we're going to do is I'd like you now actually to read the passage from Jamaica Inn. It's one that you've read before. You've probably got it in your folders or your homework. If you haven't got it on you, I have attached it to Go for Schools. So if you want to take the time to download it and print it off now so you can have a quick read of it through. But I'd like you to read it because it will help you understand some of the next few slides. So I'd like to stop the recording and have a read through that passage. Okay, so here's the question there. As you can see, the question is identical. The text is from the opening of a novel, so that's exactly where it comes from, and the question remains exactly the same. 8 marks, we know you're meant to spend 10 minutes on it. So, Jamaica Inn answers. This actually comes from the from the smart scheme itself. As you can see, as an English teacher, unlike maths teachers or science teachers, I don't really have a great deal to work with. I've got 4 bullet points to look over, and then I have to make a decision whether I think, yes, that is a structural point and it makes sense. But in the answers, a student could have focused on the overall structure of a journey, moving through a place, because we're on a horse and cart and we're moving from one place to another. We don't get to our destination, but we're certainly moving. The change of a structural focus from outside to inside, so we get the setting and how miserable it is, and then we zoom all the way inside to the carriage and we can see the people in there. And the consistent reminder of the weather, recapitulated through the text, so we're constantly given the idea that it's raining, that it's dripping, that it's miserable. And then we go even further, as you can see, narrowing the focus to individual characters. We meet every character in the carriage. And I think even more than that, we finish with Mary Ellen, but we actually get an opportunity to go inside her head. So if you can imagine, this is like the most amazing zoom in ever. We're looking over at the whole fields and the ground. We zoom into the horse and carriage, and then we zoom inside into the carriage itself. We meet the characters, we meet Mary Ellen, and then we zoom into her head. So this is a perfect example of where we see that change of focus, shift of perspective throughout the passage going through that. So this is what the exam board thinks a student that would be getting 7 to 8 marks should be writing. And I actually don't think it's particularly complicated. There's a couple of very good words there, academic words I'd imagine in there. But in terms of what they're actually writing, to me it's pretty straightforward. The text is about a journey. It's structured to also take the reader on a journey, from the general to the specific, from the outside to the inside, from the weather through the coach, the driver, the horse and the passengers. So as an examiner, I'm marking 2 or 3 things just in that opening paragraph, and it's, what, 1 sentence. But then we've got the next paragraph. There is a constant reminder of weather in each part. Little drips of rain that come through the roof. The rain oozes through the crack of the roof onto Mary's shoulder. So the reader is constantly made to feel wet and uncomfortable, just like the passengers. And as you can see, if we keep reading through this answer, you can see words like, there we have, middle of the extract. So that's what we're talking about there. The text narrows down. We've got all these different types of words and phrases that we can use, and we've got them working here. So this is a typical 7 to 8 answer. So just give yourself an opportunity to quickly read that through and tell yourself, is that an impossible answer to get 7 or 8 marks? On the next slide, we'll have a look at what you need to do to get 5 or 6, and I think it's even easier. So we should be in a position where all of us in being able to do this should get 5 or 6 marks from this question, whatever the passage we get. So this is a 5 to 6 marker from the marks, and this is what they think students should be writing, or in a similar style to this. And if you just take a moment now to have a quick read of it through, you'll see again, there's not a great deal that I think is particularly complicated here. What this student has done is read those first 2 bullet points and understood that what they should be talking about is, well, where does the passage begin, where does the passage move in the middle, and where does the passage end? And if you look at that, this is what this student has managed to do. Okay, so again, give yourself a quick read of this, and again, ask yourself the question, is this impossible? Am I not able to get 5 or 6 marks for this question? Because I think in reality, it isn't that difficult. We put a lot of barriers up with this question. We think it's going to be hard, so we close down to it. When in reality, it's not that difficult once you've understood and you know what your structural techniques are that you're going to be using. So what I'd like you to actually do now is actually give one a go. So I'd like you to get out the Brighton Rock paper if you've got it, or again, like with the Jamaica Inn, it's on the go for schools, ready for you to download. I'd like you to pull off the passage, and I'd like you to have a read of it through from start to finish. And then what I'd like you to do is to stop the recording, read the passage, and I want you to highlight at least 3 examples of structure that you can find in the entire passage. You can do more, but 3 is going to be the minimum if you want to get at least 5 or 6 marks. Then I'd like you to try and write an answer, but be honest, spend no more than 10 minutes writing this answer up. Then restart the recording and we'll compare our responses to what we've got with us, and we'll see what you've done as well. Okay, so stop the recording now. So on the in the mark scheme, as you can see, always helpful. AQA have given me a very little to go on, but these are the types of things I'm looking for when it comes to structure. So in the Brighton Rock paper, the overall structure of Hale's journey. So his plan for the day, thinking back on the day before, so we've got that idea of a flashback coming in there. The change of structural focus from Hale to the crowd and the streets of Brighton. and then of course we return back to hail. So if you imagine, if we're looking at it as a movie camera, we're focused on hail at the beginning, then we do this lovely sweep around Brighton, and we focus in on different aspects of it, the people, the crowds, the train station, the aquarium, and then we almost turn all the way back round and we're looking at hail again. Lots of students have picked that up when I've done this as a practice for me, so hopefully you picked that up as well. The consistent reminder of the time and Hale's nervousness and fate. Time is constantly used throughout the whole thing, and reminding that he is a man who is never late. And then finally, the narrowing down the focus of the individual again and returning to the beginning with the idea of the bitter nails and the inky fingers. So this again, what the examiner thinks a 5 to 6 mark example looks like. Give yourself a moment just to quickly read through this, but I don't think it's particularly challenging. So this is an example of a level 4, 7 to 8 marks, and again just take the time to have a quick read through what this student has done here. But again, you can see that not only is it more academic in terms of the writing, this student's obviously got a really good understanding of what it means when it comes to structure. Understanding it. And actually that's all they've written, but this still gets 2 marks. It shows all level 1 bullet points to be met. They've made a simple reference to the text by mentioning Hale and Brighton, and the effect comment of simple and generalised nature. The reason I wanted to show you this is that we still have quite a few students that don't even attempt this question because they don't think they can get any marks. Every single student in our year group should be able to write even that. And if that's worth 2 marks, that's 2 marks that could get you to a grade 5, 2 marks to get you to a grade 6. So you've got to make sure you are writing something. On the next slide, I'll show you what a student has done to get the full 8 marks out of 8 marks. So what I'm going to do on this one, I'm not going to read it through with you, you can do that yourself, but you can see this student clearly has got the subject terminology, they've got the example, the comment on the effect, subject terminology, example, and so on and so on. And again, the student hasn't written loads, yet you can clearly see the student's completely understood the idea of structure. So give yourself a moment to read this through, and then go on to the next slide to see the next part of her writing. So we have the next part of the writing here. Again, just give yourself a minute to look through this. And as you can see, the student only wrote a side and about 5 or 6 lines. That's it. But this student got all 8 marks. This response blends all 3 of the skills required to build a response which manages to be detailed while still concise. Examples and terminology are melded within the comments on the effect which demonstrates a more perceptive understanding. This student just got it. They used the technique, they used the examples, the best examples in my opinion, and they clearly understood why the writer had chosen to do those structural techniques. They got 8 marks for that answer. They didn't need to go on and on and on. And you can tell this student didn't take 10 minutes to write that response. So make sure that you've done, as I said before in other PowerPoints, make sure you've got your heavy lifting done in the planning and prep time at the beginning. When you've read that passage through first of all, and then you're going through the questions, use that time to get all your notes down. Save your time when it comes to writing, and I guarantee you, your life will be a lot easier when it comes to answering these questions. What I'd like you to do now is obviously to continue your revision on AO2, particularly on structure. If you look on Go for Schools, it's set up for a homework for all of you. You've got lots of work on language and structure on there. Just go onto them, take the download packs and revise them. Subsequently, the other things you can do, you've got lots of papers in your packs now. You've been doing lots of papers with your teachers. Get one of the papers out, maybe look at some of the questions you did in the past. What did you get wrong? Rewrite them, bring them back in. You bring them back in, we'll mark them for you. Okay, thank you.